Hello, everyone, and welcome to Walking Through the Bible. It's always nice to gain the approval of others. Nobody likes to be hated, to be mocked, or to be shunned. We all like to be listened to be respected, and to be liked. Yet we need to remember that the approval of man should be seen as secondary when compared to the approval of God. We can be approved of by man and be rejected by God, and we can be disapproved of by man and approved of by God. In Job 29, Job is contrasting his life before suffering with what he will say in chapter 30, which is his current state. How did the people view him before he began to suffer? Let's find out. So if you have a Bible with you, you can turn to Job chapter 29. We're going to be reading from verses 14 to 25. If you don't have a Bible, don't worry. Just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So, Job chapter 29, beginning at verse 14. I put on righteousness, and it clothed me. My justice was like a robe and a turban. I was eyes to the blind, and I was feet to the lame. I was a father to the poor, and I searched out the case that I did not know. I broke the fangs of the wicked and plucked the victim from his teeth. Then I said, I shall die in my nest and multiply my days as the sand. My root is spread out to the waters, and the dew lies all night on my branch. My glory is fresh within me, and my bow is renewed in my hand. Men listened to me and waited and kept silence for my counsel. After my words they did not speak again, and my speech settled on them as dew. They waited for me as for the rain, and they opened their mouth wide as for the spring rain. If I mocked at them, they did not believe it, and the light of my countenance they did not cast down. I chose the way for them and sat as chief. So I dwelt as a king in the army, and one who comforts mourners. Job is longing for the days before this period of suffering. We said in the last lesson we don't know how much time has passed between chapter 1 and chapter 29, but whatever time it was, it seemed like an eternity ago to Job. He remembered it, but not as something that was like yesterday or last week. We also discussed how Job viewed this former time as a time that God was with him, noting that God was still with Job, even though Job didn't think he was. Continuing on with verse 14, Job describes his former state as a time when Job put on righteousness as clothing and justice was like a robe and a turban. What is Job saying here? Is he admitting his sinful state like his friends had been claiming? No, rather what he is saying is that before he began to suffer, he was righteous, desiring to walk in the ways of God, that, just as our clothing can identify our thoughts, wealth, and values, Job's righteousness was seen in what he did, and what was recognized so by others. And that last part, I believe, is important. If someone walks down the street naked, people are going to notice. If someone walks down the street in rags, people are going to notice. If someone walks down the street in fancy clothing, people are going to notice. The people around Job knew his behavior and his conduct, and they knew that Job was righteous. Now, Job didn't change in terms of righteousness. He still clothed himself in righteousness. The difference was his suffering caused his friends to view Job's clothing as rags, as signs of evil. You see, while righteousness should always be seen by others as rich, desirable clothing, it isn't always seen that way. Someone who won't support the sinful lifestyle of the homosexual due to it being against the word of God is seen as a bigot, as seen as wearing filthy rags, when in fact they are simply following the revealed will of God, being clothed in a righteousness that God clothes us in through faith in Jesus. Someone who won't lie, gamble, cheat, or steal can be viewed the same way. Job was still the same man, but in the eyes of the world, he was different due to his physical state. How else did those around Job view him before his period of suffering? He was like eyes to the blind, feet to the lame, and father to the poor. When Job didn't know about the situation of someone, he did not cast them aside. He listened to them and investigated their cases, just as he would for his friends. He would break the fangs of the wicked, put them to shame, and defeat them, plucking their victims from the teeth of the wicked one. Job's word was listened to and respected, and if his countenance shined upon them, they would scarcely believe it. They would be incredulous that Job would turn his attention to them. He was like a king of the army, and as one who comforts mourners. And as such, Job believed he would die of old age, in the peace of his own home. That's quite the life that Job had, and from what we read of in chapter 1 is not an exaggeration either. But all of us eventually learn things can change. They may change because God causes them to change. They may change because of actions we took. And they change simply by time and circumstance. What doesn't change, though, is God and his expectations for us. Job could be righteous whether he was rich or poor. He should have been able to be respected whether rich or poor, though we know that the poor are rarely respected by men. And Job should have been able to be content whether rich or poor. Now, I'm not saying that Job had lost his faith in God, for we know that he hasn't. But we also know that Job really didn't like his current state and had been longing for death. And to some extent, we can understand why. His suffering is absolutely terrible. And yet, all Job needed was God, something Job had. All Job needed to do was keep his eyes on the future glory of heaven. And if he did those things, even he could learn to be content with his current state, terrible as it was, for it was only temporary compared to eternity. Job longed for a past that he didn't believe would return. How would he describe his present? We'll find that out, the Lord willing, in the next lesson. With that, our time is up for today. Tomorrow is Victoria Day in Ontario, Canada, so we will be taking a one-day break and return, the Lord willing, on Tuesday, May 20th, 2025. When we return, we hope you'll join us for our discussion of Job 30, verses 1 to 15, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time. We thank you for watching Walking Through the Bible today. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave them below. But if you like this video, we ask that you consider subscribing to our channel so you won't miss out on other videos in our series, as well as share this video among your friends so that the saving message of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.